Okay, we are starting session 9, I believe. So welcome. We only have Andrea and Pete here today. Okay, well, I hope everyone else joins later. Oh, Kirsten just texted and said she's going to have to watch the recording later. Her computer broke today or crashed today. Let's see here. Who else is supposed to be on Zoom? Valerie, but she's not here yet. All right, let's go ahead and get started. At least we will have a recording for everybody. Okay, Andrea, I'm making you co-host in case anyone else signs in. Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vadhitamastu Ma Vidvishavahai Om Shanti 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 Om Yogena Chittasya Padena Vacham Malam Sharirasya Cha Vaidyakena Yopakarotam Pravaram Muninam Patanjalim Pranjali Ranatosmi Abahu Purushakaram Shankachakra Siddharinam Sahasra Shirasham Shvetam Pranamami Patanjalim Srimate Anantaya Nagarajaya Namo Namaha Namo Namaha Namo Namaha All right. Welcome, Valerie. All right, so we left off at, was it 19th Sutra? Okay. Visesha, 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 Linga Matra, Lingani, Guna, Harvani. Referring to the stages of evolution. You know, yoga, the practice of yoga for many of us, actually for, I would say 99.999% of us, is a practice of going from the gross to the subtle. We start off with asana practice, which deals with the physical body, gross, tangible. And then over time, we start to understand its yoga's effect on the mind, you know, energy, body, mind, and then eventually intellect and then consciousness. You know, yoga, I say all the time in my classes that yoga is a journey back to source. So from the moment we take birth, we're coming out into the world. We are soul and then the soul takes form, embryo form. And embryo form, we take, the organs start to develop, the heartbeat, vocal cords, the sense organs, arms, fingers, and all that. Then we come out into the world, and then we explore. So our whole lives is our life is the evolution of the subtle to the gross, and then we live in this gross material world. Yoga practice is going backwards, and here he's just listing, mentions that the stages of the gunas is to go from the gunas are in themselves are subtle, right? The gunas themselves are subtle, and here he's saying that we're going from gross backwards to the subtle, from the manifest to the unmanifest. Like in a few weeks ago, maybe a month or two ago, we talked about quantum physics. That's the same idea, right? We went from like physical manifestation, and we went down deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until we went to the unified field. Remember the unified field, which is the place from which all matter or manifestation springs from. So here again, just reminding us that the evolution of the gunas is from subtle to gross, and that this journey towards samadhi is a journey from the gross to the subtle, or from the manifest to the unmanifest. Okay? Yeah, I use this in when I'm teaching asanas. I'll say this. I usually mention this towards the end of class as we start to move inward. I talk about moving from gross to subtle. And I think we talked about the linga last time, linga being the penis, or phallic symbol. All right, moving on to 20, second chapter, 20th sutra. Drishta drishi matra shuddho api pratyaya anupashya, or pashyaha. The observer, drishta is the observer. Remember the word drishti. We see this all the time in yoga, drishti. Drishta, drashtu. Here is drashta being the seer. Drashta means the seer, one who observes, the witness. Drishi, the act of observing. Matra, alone. Shuddha, purity, like saucha, shuddhi, purification. Shuddha means pure. Uncontaminated by the gunas. He's referring to the seer. He's saying here the seer, the drishta, is unaffected by the gunas. Even so, during the chitta, say, even so, mental mode, referring to chitta vrittis, pratyaya, mem pratyaksha, numana, gama, pramana, pratyaya being a chitta vritti here. Anu means follows. Anupashya follows completely or thoroughly, that it observes without a break. In other words, consciousness is unwavering. Consciousness is unwavering, right? There's no break in awareness. It is, imagine a floodlight that is, or a lighthouse, a light that does not flicker. Candle flickers, right? Gets brighter, gets dull, but consciousness does not do that. Consciousness doesn't get dull. It's only in the mind that gets dull. He's saying that the consciousness is shuddha. Shuddha is pure. It's not contaminated. Remember, it can't be burnt, it can't be wet, it can't be destroyed, it can't be divided. So consciousness, you got to understand this, the purity of consciousness, the purity of spirit, the purity of awareness. Awareness in itself is pure. It is not affected by the gunas. Only prakriti is affected by the gunas. And prakriti referring to the mind and the body. So here the observer only observes. It never acts. This is very important to understand. The observer does not act. Remember in the first chapter we talked about the seer and the doer. Drishta being the seer. The doer is the ahamkara. I am doing. I am, kara doing. The actor. But the consciousness is not the actor. There was a post by Dharma Mitra. He always says this. He says, he goes, make every posture, every asana an offering to the divine. And remember that you are not doing the asanas. You are not the doer. You are the seer. You are not the doer. You are the seer. So the observer, the function of awareness is one and one only. What is the function of awareness? To be aware. That is all. To be aware, to observe, to witness. To witness. It is pure consciousness. Pure consciousness. Even so, it unfailingly and continuously follows the mental mold. In other words, whatever your chitta is producing at that time, the awareness seems to take on that form. That's why you have that experience. For example, if in my chitta, if my mind is in a tamasic mold, like sleepy, depressed, or sad, or confused, then I'm going to feel as if I am sad, depressed, or confused. But the truth is, I am not. I'm only experiencing sadness or confusion or depression, right? Even psychology nowadays says that, right? I am not sadness. I am experiencing sadness. The yogis have said this. It's clearly written right here, is that the observer does not get tainted by the mind. The observer does not get tainted by the mind. It is pure. It's uncontaminated. The observer is not contaminated by the mental mold or changed by it. Remember that. You can have this experience in deep meditation, in samadhi. You can understand this. So, I'm sorry?
Sounds like the lotus.
Sounds like the lotus, Pete says. What do you mean?
Born of the mud, but not contaminated by it.
Right. In the world, but not of it. Absolutely. Yeah, the lotus flowers is symbolic of enlightenment, right? It's the realizing that we are not of the mud, in the world, but not of it. You know, like where they use this to describe, the Christ, in the world, but not of it. The lotus flower grows out of the mud in a pod through a stem until it reaches the surface, and then it opens up, and all the petals are untouched by the mud. There's not one speck of mud on the lotus. As a matter of fact, water even beads off of the lotus like the ducks. You pour water on a duck's back, it doesn't get the duck wet, it just beads right off. Same idea. Mind and awareness are separate, as like oil and water. So there's this idea that the mind, your mind, my mind, everyone's mind, its purpose, what is its purpose and function? Its purpose is to serve me. My mind is to serve me. Your mind is to serve you. And who are you? You are the awareness. You are the spirit. You are the consciousness. So oftentimes the mind becomes our master. In our lives, we have this experience where the mind is making all the decisions, and then we just follow along. But the truth is, in this existence, in this creation of this human existence, and even animals too, that the mind was given to us to serve us. Osho once said that the mind is a beautiful servant, yet a dangerous master. Okay, so that sutra, the 20th sutra, refers to the how the mind cannot contaminate the soul. Okay, mind cannot contaminate the soul. 21, tat. Tat, what's tat? Tat refers to that. What is that? That being the self. Artha. artha, goal, or the object. Eva, even. Drishyasya, drishya, drishyasya is of the observed. Atma refers to the center of our being, inner self. Atma is the inner self, synonymous with Purusha. Synonymous with Purusha. So for the sake of the self alone, for the sake of the self alone, or the Purusha, the observed functions. Interesting. That's what I just said, that the mind is here to serve. I guess I remember a few things here and there. Yes, here he's saying that the purpose of the mind is to serve the Purusha. The mind always tries to satisfy the self. But here's the problem. See, the mind is always trying to please the self or satisfy the self. The problem is that we identify the ego as being the self. So then the mind ends up trying to satisfy the ego all the time. And that's what most of us experience, is that we're trying to always satisfy the ego because that's the false self, right? Here's the note in this book. It says, the mind always tries to satisfy the self, but the self doesn't need satisfying. The mind doesn't know this, so it keeps trying to do it. So our whole lives, we end up joblessly busy trying to satisfy the ego mind, running around like crazy and never really getting satisfaction. Maybe for a moment, we get momentary satisfaction, but then again, the mind cries, and then we try to satisfy the mind, pacify the mind. The note here says texts on yoga point this out. What text? Well, we are studying a text, but the text that they're talking about here is actually the Sankhya text. Sankhya text. Sankhya points this out. Sankhya. See, our whole lives, if we're trying to please the ego, right? Ramaswamy says this. He's like, yeah, our whole lives we're trying to please ourselves. The problem is we don't know who we are. So if we don't realize who we are, we're trying to please the wrong person, right? We identify with the ego mind, and so we keep trying to please this, but then at some point we realize, wow, I'm not my mind. So who am I? If I'm not my mind, I'm not my preferences, I'm not my body, then who am I? Then what's the point of trying to please this false self? And so that's when we reach a stage in our lives where we are having some kind of crisis. Identity crisis, right? Identity crisis. Who am I? So just reiterating, you can write this down, that the chitta only produces experiences for the Purusha. Only produces experiences for the Purusha. There's a story in Sankhya, actually, in the Sankhya text, about a king. Have I told you guys a story about the king and the court dancer? No? You don't remember that?
I think so.
You think so? The king and the court dancer? All right, I'll tell the story again. So the king is, the court dancer comes, the king is sitting on his throne, and every day the court dancer comes and does a beautiful dance performance. And they do this to please the king, day in and day out. She starts at a very young age. She starts at a very young age, and decades pass, and she's still dancing. On the last day, the day before she is relieved of duty, she does one final dance, and then at the end, she looks to the king and asks, "Did I please you? I hope I've made you happy this entire time." And the king looks down at the dancer and smiles and says, "Dear, you fail to realize I'm already happy. You don't need to make me happy." The king represents the Purusha, and the dancer represents the Chitta. And so the whole time, the Chitta is trying to please something that is already happy. Does that make sense? The Chitta is always trying to satisfy the Purusha, but the Purusha doesn't need pleasing. It's the mind that needs pleasing. The mind is trying to please the soul, when really the mind is trying to please the mind. Yeah, the mind is trying to please the mind. Because when we reach a state of mental quietude, we find that there's nothing needed to experience happiness and joy. That happiness and joy is our natural state. It is our natural state, not a happiness that is dependent on something happening, right? Not a happiness that is dependent on a happening, but a happiness that is inherent of one's nature, right? Bliss is our natural state. Bliss is our natural state. And we can realize this whenever we can quiet the mind. It's whenever the mind is not quiet that we experience dissatisfaction. We'd experience dissatisfaction because the mind's constant trying to get something or trying to get rid of something. Always trying to get something or get rid of something. If you notice that day in, day out, I want this, I want to get rid of this. I want this, I want to get rid of this. I want this, I want to get rid of this. And so if we can't get what we want, we are unhappy. And if we can't get rid of what we don't want, we are unhappy, right? But if we can get past this sort of happening, if we can get beyond the events that make us happy or sad, then we can find out what is this bliss? What is this? What is bliss? What is Ananda? Okay, moving on. Actually, a question that you can, for this particular sutra, the question that you can write down and contemplate is, what truly makes me happy? Think about that. Meditate on that. What truly makes me happy? And you have to sit with it for a while, because what's going to happen is you're going to come up with all these answers right away. But then if you sit a little longer, you're going to find that these answers will change. If you sit long enough, you'll start to realize that there are only a few things that truly make you happy. And then see what it is about that makes you happy. So just meditate on that. Spend hours meditating on what truly makes you happy. And then these sutras will back up those insights that or conclusions you will come up with. 22nd Sutra. So these Yoga Sutras was codified around 2,500 years ago, according to scholars. Around this time, there was also Buddhism, Vedanta, a bunch of contemporary schools of thought in India. You gotta understand, Buddhism wasn't around at the beginning of yoga. Buddhism came after yoga. Anyways, but around this time, around the Yoga Sutras, Buddhism was around, and this sutra is actually an argument. This is an argument versus, or let's say against, Vedanta or Buddhism. You gotta understand, these schools of thought, they're like philosophical, theological schools or groups or gangs. It's like I feel like, and they debate each other. And one of the things about these spiritual debates is that they will never come to a conclusion, because they're fundamentally different philosophies. For example, yoga is a dualistic philosophy. Yoga is a dual. Did I tell you this in the very beginning? You guys remember this? That yoga is dualistic. There's object, subject, subject, object. There's a me and there's a world outside of me that is separate. Vedanta says that there is no world that is separate from you. That is only the illusion that we're all one, that we're all manifestations of the one, we're all part of the source, which is true. Both are true to some degree, right? And then Buddhism, of course, does not recognize or deny the fact that there is a Purusha, because that can, or God, because it cannot be proved or disproved. So Buddhism was more about alleviating suffering. So Buddhism took from yoga the idea of removing suffering, but not realizing true nature, because the idea of realizing one's true nature is all subjective, and that the believer will never convince the non-believer in a million years, generally speaking, and the knower cannot convince the non-knower, Like the knower cannot convince the ignorant. Does that make sense? The only way the ignorant can understand is by having a direct experience. Truly, you can read about it, but that's not real knowledge. That's secondhand knowledge. You can hear about it. That's again secondhand knowledge. You can infer something. Again, that's not a direct experience. So really, the only way to have these to know something is to have a direct experience. So, anyways, the different schools. So, krit artham, artha referring to the goal. Krit means doing or doing the goal, reaching the goal, having accomplished the goal. Krit artham. Prati is to or of. Nashtam means to destroy. What is destroyed? The chitta. The chitta is destroyed. What does it mean to be destroyed? Made silent, to make it go away. The experience is gone. Api, even so, anashtam, not destroyed. What is not destroyed? That anya, the other. What is other? Other sadhar ranatvat. Because it exists, it continues for all others. Okay, so what he's saying here is just because one person reaches a level of enlightenment, other people don't. If I reach this level of enlightenment and awareness, it doesn't mean everyone else automatically reaches this state and say, right? What I know, what you know, but we don't know the same thing at the same time. Okay, so if that's the reality of our experience, then Vedanta can't be true. That if we are all one, the argument is this: if we are all truly one, and one person reaches enlightenment, everyone on the planet should automatically become enlightened. But that's not the case. That can't be argued any further. So Patanjali was like, this is a pretty good argument. Let's put it in the sutras. For a yogi who has reached the ultimate goal of kaivalya or samadhi, kaivalya, the observed ceases to function. My mind ceases. What is the observed? Not the external world. I observe my mind, right? Everything that I observe, we talked about this in the first chapter. Everything that I observe is happening in my mind, not out here. We think it's out here. Yes, there is something happening out here, but my experience is in here. I am observing my mind. My mind is the object. So once I reach a state of freedom, I've quieted my mind, but other people's minds will still function. This is what the sutra is saying. Once one has reached the goal, the mind is destroyed, but even so, other minds are still working, and it will continue to work in the same way, right? Samskaras. Does that make sense, you guys? It's a very powerful argument. I would like to see a yogi debate a Vedanta person. I would like to see what a Vedanta person says. But this debate's been going on for thousands of years. And they'll never come to a conclusion. The conclusion is we would just have to agree to disagree. We'll have to agree to disagree. So Ramaswamy said this. He said, study if you're really interested in finding out the truth of all these things, study all the subjects, and then just pick the one that you like the most and adhere to that. One's not better than the other. They're all good. They're all going to take you to a level of enlightenment. It's just how you see the world. What program or what operating system are you going to use to experience the world? Does that make sense? Which operating system do you choose to use to experience the world? And it's interesting because Krishnamacharya, our great-grandfather guru, he was a scholar in all of these philosophies, but he felt that yoga was the thing that was going to serve people the most. And so he became a yogacharya, which is a yoga teacher. And he taught people from all different religions and backgrounds and nationalities, because he thought that yoga was the most universal. It's the most universal. And I agree. I agree. Because not everyone's going to, because with Vedanta, you have to understand that accept the fact that there is a creator. In yoga, you can not believe in a creator and still experience yoga. Whereas with Vedanta, if you don't believe in God, then the whole thing is out the door. That makes sense? The whole philosophy is negated if you don't believe in God or accept that there is a God. And and Buddhism kind of falls short of yoga. With yoga compared to yoga, it falls short because it stops. It gets to the edge of the mind, and it doesn't go any further. It only explores the mind. Traditional, the traditional Buddhists. Now, nowadays, there are so many types of Buddhists. It's like veered off into different branches. There's some Buddhists will say, oh, there are gods and goddesses in Buddhism. Well, the original Buddha didn't talk about gods or goddesses or anything. He's like, let's not talk about that. It's gonna cloud your mind. Let's just talk about suffering. Anyways, let's move on. There's a page 40 of your book has these side notes on yoga, Vedanta, and Buddhism. A little more clarification here before we move on, actually. Patanjali's argument is that kaivalya, or freedom, is attained only by an individual because all other human beings still suffer and are not changed. To the Buddhists, he would say, when one person's thought ends, all thoughts in all people do not end. So Buddhists agree with this. But to the Advaita Vedantins, Patanjali would say that when an individual is changed, all are not changed. So there cannot be only one self, because in Vedanta there's only one soul. There's one soul, and all of our souls is that one soul. One soul lives in all of us. One soul, all being illusion. If that were the case, when one part is changed, all would be changed. Okay, that's just saying what I just said. Okay, I brought this actually. I brought this argument to a Buddhist, and it's interesting. The Buddhist said, "No, the Buddhists do believe in soul." I'm like, dude, do you even know what you're talking about as a Buddhist? But I don't know. Anyways, let's not go there. I don't want to say bad things about people. 23. Sva. What does sva mean? Sva means self. Sva means self. Sva, swami, or swami. Swami. Shaktyo means shakti. Shakti means power. So this is all one word. Sva, swami, shaktyo. It is the power to produce the experience and the power to have the experience, right? The power to produce and to experience. Produce the experience and to experience the experience. Which if you think about that or meditate on this idea that the experience is produced by you and then you get to experience the experience, that is a miracle. That's existence, right? To exist, to be aware, to have an experience. What are you experiencing? You are experiencing a production made by you. Think about that. Every experience you have is made by you. Yeah, we may be stimulated from the external world. We may take information from the external world, but it goes through our filter and our mind, our egos, and then it's presented to ourselves, and then we have that experience. That is, that's beyond AI. That we're in the age of AI, right? AI does not produce an experience and have an experience. We are so far more complex than any computer system that man has created. And now they're talking about making AI self-aware. I don't think so. I mean, not to this level, not to the level in which we are aware. That's not even fathomable. Okay, anyways, the chitta or the mind and the purusha or the self appear indistinguishable because of their tight proximity. They appear to be one and have the same because of their close proximity. Like I said earlier, it's kind of like the mind, the self takes on the form of the mind, right? Remember we talked about the samskaras, the mind, like our onions or garlic contaminating the cutting board. Okay, that's the mind being contaminated by itself. But the purusha would be sort of like the countertop that the cutting board is on. You got the countertop that's what, granite, marble? What do I have there? Is that granite? Anyways, those, whatever rock it is, it's supposed to be somewhat impermeable, right? But it still gets tainted. But anyways, so imagine the countertop being impermeable, the wood cutting board, which is the mind, and then the thoughts are the garlic and the turmeric or the onions. It stains. But because they're so close in proximity, we feel like there's the cutting board and the countertop might be one, but it's not. It's kind of like oil and water. Although they are very close in proximity, they never mix. I shouldn't say never mix, because I'm sure under high pressure they probably would mix, but they don't mix under regular conditions. But milk and water do. You pour milk into water and it'll mix and it'll stay mixed. So this is the sort of a comparison. Ramaswamy said that being able to separate consciousness from the mind is as difficult as separating milk from water with a straw. Right? Because the mind is turbulent, there's it seems to always be mixing. But whenever the mind is quiet, what happens is it separates, kind of like balsamic vinaigrette dressing. Like you shake it up and it mixes, but if you let it sit a little while, you'll start to see that it separates, right? So it's the same idea. Because the mind is constantly spinning, it seems we're stirring up the milk and water. To be able to distinguish consciousness from mind, you have to be able to separate the milk from the water with a straw. So very difficult. That's why they use the swan analogy. You know how, ever see a swan take water, like really small sips? They're able to like separate. You know, when they feed, ducks do the same thing. You ever watch them feed? They're like, you know, they separate the food from the water. They're able to separate, you know, the food from the water, from the moss or whatever. And so imagine a swan separating milk from water. And it's difficult because of their close proximity. And that's why many people confuse consciousness and mind. That's why they say, oh, my soul feels this, my soul feels that. When the yogis will say, no, that's not true. The soul doesn't feel a thing. The soul is inert. It is impenetrable. It's pure. All right. So moving on. Oh, I wrote. Here's a note that you might want to write down. So avidya, going back to the kleshas, the avidya being the first klesha, right? There are 5 kleshas. Avidya, first one. I got her. What happened, Danielle? Have you been out for a while? Okay. Anyways, avidya is the inability Remember we said avidya is ignorance or wrong knowledge. Here is another definition. Avidya is the inability to distinguish between the body-mind complex and pure consciousness. That is avidya. The inability to distinguish between the body-mind complex and pure consciousness. I'm unable to tell the difference between the false self and the true self. That is avidya. I am unable to distinguish, to discern between the true self and the false self. Okay, 24. Tatya, it's, tatya, like tat, that, tasya, it's, hetu means cause, avidya. Tasya hetu avidya. This is interesting. Typically, any sutra, Yoga Sutra, Brahma Sutra, Kama Sutra, Bhakti sutras are written to go in forward without repeating, typically. It's sort of the rule of writing a sutra. But here he's kind of going backwards. So let's see why. And what does it mean to go backwards? Tasya, so its cause, what is the cause? Avidya, ignorance, incorrect knowledge, false understanding of the self. He's already mentioned this before. The cause of not being able to distinguish between the two, the mind and the self, as mentioned in Sutra 23, previous sutra, is ignorance. Oh, that's why I wrote that. Since we have not been told about it, we have not learned it. Again, this is a subject that most of us are not exposed to by our friends, our colleagues, our teachers growing up, our parents, our physicians. This is not knowledge that is normally talked about. So we don't know about it. We just, live in ignorance. Avidya is an important term in many philosophies, Sankhya, Vedanta, Buddhism, and yoga. If all were yogis, there would be no more action. I'm not sure I completely understand this. If everyone were yogis, there would be no more action, no more world as we know it. If everyone becomes a yogi, no one would have avidya or ignorance. All the yogis will be able to see the true nature of their own selves, and everyone will be in a state of kaivalya. In kaivalya, the chitta is in a state of complete stoppage. Therefore, there would be no more action because there would be no more desire or hatred. It's that's the thing, the word yogi here refers to someone who has reached a state of yoga, which is samadhi or kaivalya or enlightenment. And when I was studying this, I was like, why is it that everyone throws around the word yogi like it's, for example, in class, all right, yogis, lift your right leg up. You ever hear that? Yogis, step or jump to the front of the mat. And I've been guilty of that too. But one who practices yoga is not necessarily a yogi. One who practices yoga is not a yogi, but we use that term as if that's the truth. One who practices yoga is known as a sadhaki. Sadhaki, S-A-D-H-A-K-I. It's like sadhana. Sadhana means practice or means. So when you practice yoga, you are a sadhaki, a spiritual practitioner or spiritual seeker. And so the proper thing to say, if you were to address your students in a class, would be sadhakis, right leg up. But we don't do that. We say yogis. So anyways, that's the difference here. if we were all yogis, then we would everyone having reached the state of yoga or a state of enlightenment and self-understanding, self-awareness, we would all the world would stop. The world would stop. This makes sense now. It would stop, meaning no one would want to do anything. Yogis are known as vitaragis. Remember from the first chapter? What's a vitaragi? One who's completely desireless. Can you imagine a bunch of desireless people walking the planet? Nothing will get done. Nothing will get done. So there are very few yogis. Few yogis. They are usually the yogis are known as outcasts. Outcasts. People who live on the fringe. They're not normal people, huh? Aesthetics. Ascetics. Yeah. Yogis are not normal people. They are different. They're extraordinary, not ordinary, extraordinary. Yes, sir.
So Krishnamacharya was not a yogi?
He was a yogi, but he was a householding yogi, yeah. So he sort of changed things. He made yoga popular amongst the householders. Because typically the yogis were, they were, for a part of his life, he lived out in the outskirts, but he came back and had a family. And so Krishnamacharya had a big influence on bringing yoga to the mainstream and introducing yoga to women, because yoga wasn't taught to women back in the day. He even wrote a book about it called the Yoga Rahasya, the secrets or mystics of yoga, the secrets of yoga. And he wrote it for women. He mentions yoga for women, practices for menstruation. And anyways, he was a revolutionary. He was a very progressive yogi. Krishnamacharya, amazing dude. Did a lot for yoga. So yeah, Ramaswamy said that 1 in a million people are interested in reaching the goal of yoga. 1 in a million. 1 in a million people are interested in reaching samadhi. Think about that. How many people do you know interested in reaching samadhi? Do you know anybody interested in reaching samadhi? Peter, do you know anybody interested in reaching samadhi? Do you know anybody that's interested in reaching samadhi? You do? Can you name that person right now? Do you know anybody? Anyone watching this right now? Can you name somebody right now that you know that is interested in going for it? I don't know anybody. Not truly, because if you were interested, you'd drop everything. You would drop everything. You would renounce your life and you would go and live in a cave somewhere and right? Or live in the woods. Do what Jesus did. You would do what Jesus did. How many people are actually doing what Jesus did? 40 days and 40 nights. So 1 in a million people are interested in reaching samadhi. And then he said, of the 1 in a million, of the ones who are interested in reaching the goal of samadhi, 1 in a million will get there. So the odds are stacked against us. So truly, how many yogis are there really? There really aren't many yogis. And if you go to India, there are a lot of people who look the part, but may not be real yogis. As a matter of fact, you'll get, people will tell you, be careful of the charlatans. Be careful of the charlatans. What are charlatans? I didn't know that word until I started studying yoga. What is a charlatan?
False prophets.
Yeah, false. Well, someone who says something that they're not. So I don't know. And I think in other religions they say, beware the false prophets. Beware the false prophets. Okay, moving on. 24 to 25. All right, so here I think it's about destruction. Let me see here. Tat, again, that, referring to the previous sutra, that being avidya. Abhavat, abhavat means non-exist, bhavat means exist. Some yoga means complete union. Samyoga means complete union, or here he wrote intermingling. Sam means complete, yog means integration. So complete integration or intermingling. What intermingling of what? Intermingling of the seer and the seen, the chitta and the purusha. The intermingling of the chitta and the purusha. Hanam, Hanam refers to destruction. Destruction of what? The pain or dukkha. Destruction of dukkha, the mind's pain, dukkha. Tat that, drishe, the seer of the seer, kaivalyam. Kaivalya means alone. Kaivalya means alone, the state of being alone, not disturbed by the mind, Kaivalya also is translated as freedom. Kaivalya is also translated as freedom, like this book here, Discipline of Freedom. So Kaivalya meaning freedom, but Kaivalya means alone. Alone and free are the same, because if one is bound, one is not free. In order to be free, you must become unbound. If I'm unbound, then I am free. If I had my arm handcuffed to Peter's arm, then I'm not free. I'm bound. But in order for me to be free, I need to release the shackles, free myself of all that binds. Okay, so that's what Kaivalya means. So what does this mean? It means the removal of avidya, of ignorance. What is it? The mistaken identity of the self leads to the removal or the destruction of the intermingling or the complete union or the complete integration of the seer and the seen, or the self and the non-self. That is the destruction of misery and pain mentioned earlier in Sutra 16, hayam, meaning destruction, and that is freedom, the undisturbed state of the seer, which is bliss. The undisturbed state of the seer, which is, remember, unwavering, unflickering, right? This is not like an LED light. LED lights flicker, yes? LED lights flicker. Consciousness does not flicker like that. You look at an LED light and you don't think that it flickers. We can't see it flickering. But if you take a fan and you see the propeller hit by the light, you can see that it does flicker. Does it make sense? Consciousness does not do that. Okay. So the note on this particular sutra is that pain is only connected to the mind, not the self. Patanjali Yoga Sutra, yoga describes the karma theory of future births, and that the kaivalya, or freedom here, is sort of the escape from that. Kaivalya is supposed to end future births. So freedom from more births and deaths is ultimately the freedom of yoga, the promise of yoga, as well as freedom from pain. Pain which is caused in the mind, not necessarily physical pain. Someone can have physical pain, experience physical pain, but not be in pain or suffer, right? Try taking a cold plunge. Your body, so it's interesting because I just did a cold plunge around 3:30 today, and we got in and my hands were hurting. They were hurting. I was like, I'm like, oh, this is painful. But after 2 minutes, the pain went away. The temperature didn't change a whole lot. But the pain went away. And I'm wondering, is it because my mind was getting used to it, or was there some physiological change that made the pain go away? Because the situation was the same, right? I was in 43 degrees water. The water might have increased 1 degree, but the pain level went completely down. Like the first 2 minutes, the pain level was at like a 9.5, and after 2 minutes, it was like down to like a 4. So interesting how we experience pain, and how it forces us or influences us to make choices. But if we can free ourselves from the pain, we then can free ourselves from our choices.
Ricky, I have a question. So he talks about pain and misery here, but can that be the same thing as the samskaras? Like we've burned off all the samskara that we had?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah.
Make sure I wasn't confusing it. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Good question. Because when you reach a state of kaivalya, you've destroyed all your samskaras. Very good. Very good, Andrea. I'm impressed with that question. It's true. And there's no, you cannot stop the mind if you don't change your samskaras. The samskaras have to be destroyed. The patterns and tendencies have to be destroyed.
Okay.
Great question. That kind of question can only come from someone who pays attention, which is hard to do these days, especially on this type of subject. And then me repeating myself all the time. Okay. So thanks for paying attention to this old person. So I wrote this here. Let me see what I wrote. All my life, I tried to satisfy myself, but I don't know who I am. That's the problem. The light of self-knowledge removes the darkness of ignorance, wrong knowledge of the self. The light of self-knowledge removes the darkness of ignorance, or wrong knowledge of the self. It illuminates, right? Awareness becomes, because it's a light. Awareness is a light. If you enter a dark cave, you can't see anything. That's your mind. Your mind is not self-illuminated. Your mind is a cave. The only reason you're able to see anything in your mind is because awareness is light. It casts light into the mind, and then you see it. That's why when you're in a state of tamas, you sleep or sad or depressed, it's hard to see what's going on in your mind. That's why it's cloudy. It's fog, right? But the awareness is there. It's just on the other side of the clouds. Like the sun is behind the clouds, but you can't see well because of the layer, the veil. Tamas is known as a veil. Like a you take a scarf and you pull like the wool over your eyes or something, you know? Okay. 26. Yes, very powerful. This is a very powerful sutra. Viveka. Yeah, remember this word, viveka. Viveka. Viveka means discernment. It's written in the book as discrimination. It's the same thing. Viveka means discernment, discrimination, and judgment. But not judgment in the sense that most of us use judgment, like, oh, that's a judgmental person. That's not that kind of judgment. The judgment meaning like I can judge between an apple and an orange, right? I have judgment. That's the judgment I'm talking about. Like knowing the difference between this, that, and the other. Just having discrimination or having discernment. A highly developed intellect or mind, intellectual mind has a high level of discernment. Yeah? So this is viveka. Viveka is judgment at that level, discernment. Not the superficial level of constantly casting assumptions and labels, which is a different type of judgment. Yes? Okay. So viveka, khyati. Khyati means power, I guess, or strength. Viveka, khyati, apiplava, without break or consistent, steady. Hanopayaha. Hana means destruction, referring to ignorance or avidya, and upayaha is the means of destruction. So unwavering discrimination is how you destroy ignorance. Unwavering. What is wavering discrimination? Wavering discrimination would be like, sometimes you can tell the difference, sometimes you can't. Like most of us. Some days we're tamasic, some days we're rajasic, some days we're sattvic. Some days I wake up very confused and I stay confused all day. Some days I wake up and my mind is constantly reeling, and I may understand things, but I can't focus. And then some days I'm clear, I'm quiet, and I'm focused. So unwavering discrimination is being in a sattvic state constantly. It's being in a sattvic state constantly. So you have unwavering discrimination, or unwavering discernment. It's total concentration constant. Basically, that's samadhi, right? So unwavering discrimination. So what is? How do you get unwavering discrimination? Moment by moment. Moment by moment. What is moment by moment? How many moments are in a second? How many moments are in a second? How many moments are in a millisecond?
I mean, there could be
Infinite, exactly. It's infinite. And then you take those one moment of those infinite moments within a millisecond. How many moments are within those moments? Infinite. So there moments are not, you can't say how long a moment is. It's a Sanskrit word, it's kshana. Kshana means moment. Anyways, he might mention it later. But the idea is that moment by moment, you never forget. You never forget who you are, moment by moment. That is unwavering discrimination. So if you can remember that I am the observer, the seer, the witness, moment by moment, and never have a moment where you forget. See, the problem is we forget. That's the problem. It's not that we don't know, it's we've forgotten. We forgot through the trauma of birth, and then through our lives, no one taught us. And so then we live in a reality, a paradigm or samskara. And then we might have moments of clarity where someone says something to us, or we read it and it makes sense. We're like, yeah, that's very enlightening. I understand who I am. I am not this body, not this mind, and something divine, this thing called consciousness, spirit, or Purusha, and it's pure and it's untainted. I understand this. Yeah, it makes total sense. And then we go and we run into an ex. And we forget it all, right? Or someone cuts us off and we forget it all, right? So what he's saying here is that in order to transcend ignorance, we have to develop a new samskara of knowing who we are. And it is with us constantly, from the moment we wake up to the moment we go to sleep, through our dreams, and it's still there when we wake back up. This is viveka khyati. Viveka khyati, the power of discrimination without interruption, without break. Does that make sense? So let's read through the notes here. Untangling a thread requires constant attention to keep things separate. You know, like I'm thinking of like a necklace. You ever get a gold necklace or a silver necklace? If you put it on and it stays nice, you take it off and you don't rehook the connection, the hook or whatever, and it gets tangled up, and then the next thing you know, it knots. It's like, fuck, I gotta undo this. You have to get tweezers to undo it. Untangling a thread requires constant attention in keeping things separate. This is the example. A story or myth in India says that a swan, here's a swan example, that a swan is able to separate milk from water and keep the milk only. This would be like separating the true self from the mind and keeping it separate. Keeping the true self only. Another example of attention is a mother who is working in her home, but whatever work she is doing, her mind is on her baby at all times. It's constant, right? It's constant. Also, when you attend continuously, the mind will be changed. When you attend continuously, like the balance of a seesaw that goes where the weight is. In other words, right now the balance is tipped heavily towards the mind's wrong thinking. But if we attend to our true nature, Attend, attend means meditate, right? It's the same root word, attend. When we attend to our true nature, eventually the balance is tipped, and we become more weighted in the direction of freedom and kaivalya and moksha, samadhi. Then freedom is easily maintained. But if we continue living on the other side of the seesaw, where we're pulled towards the gross, remember, gross to subtle, we get pulled towards the gross, then it's going to be very difficult. This idea is explained in the 4th chapter, Kaivalya Pada. Okay. All right. What time is it? 8:06. Okay. Okay, so 27, let's stop at 28 today, and then we'll open up for some comments and questions. Okay, so 27, tasya of such a person. What kind of person? One who reaches kaivalya, the freedom from yoga, freedom as a result of yoga. Saptada, 7. Sapta means 7. Saptada means of 7 types. Pranta bhumihi, beyond ground, or the final place. Prajna, awareness or understanding. As a result of achieving this viveka, this is an important sutra, okay? They're all important. As a result of achieving viveka, the mind is free from the 7 desires. So for a yogi who has reached kaivalya or freedom, his awareness or understanding is beyond the 7 desires. Well, 7 levels. So the 7 grounds or the 7 stages. Now, this is interesting because this is taught differently in different sutras. One of my Indian friends taught this sutra, and he said that the 7 stages refers to the 7 chakras, the 7 chakrani, because there's 7, right? But Ramaswamy says that's not the case. He says the 7 levels are the following, that everyone has a desire to know. Like, I want to know something, right? Everyone has a desire to know something. We all have a desire to avoid pain, to avoid things, right? We all have a desire to achieve. We all have a desire to do. Those are the first 4. Then the last 3 are not desires, but they're stages, like a distraction state of distraction, or a state of fear, or a state of depression. When a yogi reaches kaivalya, he is free from the desire to know anything. He is free from the desire to avoid anything. He is free from the desire to achieve anything. He is free from the desire to do anything. He is free from distraction. He is free of fear, and is free of depression. Because the mind has fundamentally been transformed. There's no more desire, and there's no more sadness. It's just in a state of bliss, constant bliss. That's why a lot of these enlightened saints of lore of old have been judged as crazy by regular people. Have you heard that? Have you heard of stories of saints being crazy? Oh, they went mad. They went mad getting enlightened. They went mad because they're just in a state of bliss. Oh, can't bother them. Everything's okay all the time. So these 7 things I just listed, or Ramaswamy listed, are is the fundamental difference between a yogi and a non-yogi. A yogi still has a non-yogi still has a desire to know. That's why we seek. That's why we seek. A non-yogi has a desire to avoid pain. Will do things, will go out of their way to avoid things. Whereas a yogi may not. A yogi will walk in front of a raging elephant. You've heard the story of the yogi who calmed the elephant? We'll get to it later. But you don't want to stand in front of an elephant, a raging bull, you know, will step on you. Regular people have a lot of desire to achieve. Even sadakis. That's the reason why we do sadhana, is we want to achieve a level of spiritual prowess. Desire to do, for example, yoga. Yeah, and regular people are distracted. Some days are distracted, some days not distracted. Vikshepta. Remember vikshepa or vikshipta. Fear. A yogi has no fear. And depression. A yogi has no depression. Okay. That's an important sutra. All right, 28. So up until this point, he's been really talking to, the entry-level yogi. Up until this point, he's been talking pretty much to the entry-level yogi. He's giving a lot of information, kind of foreshadowing what's to come, giving practices, and teaching the entry-level yogi about pain and suffering and mind and consciousness. Now 28 is for the intermediate yogi. Intermediate. This is the beginning of intermediate yogi. Yoga. Anga means parts or limbs, like Ashtanga. This is Yoganga. Yoganga means the parts of yoga or limbs of yoga. Anushtanat means a discipline or practice to stay with. Stan means to stay with. Stan. So the discipline of yoga and the parts of yoga. Ashuddhi means impurities. What are the impurities? It's referring to the gunas. Rajas and tamas are the impurities, amongst other things. But the mind is impure by rajas and tamas. Kshaye, due to the reduction or destruction. Jnana diptihi it means stage. Jnana, okay, so here it says jnana means knowledge, dipti means lamp. Okay, but jnana diptihi means stage. Stage of knowledge. Like, where are you in the stage of knowledge? Are you scratching the surface? Are you digging deeply? Aviveka. Viveka means discrimination. Aviveka, up to discrimination of the seer and the seen. Discriminating between the seer and the seen. And kyate, again, refers to the other word earlier. So earlier he said kyati means power. Here he means clarity. He says clarity. Or she wrote clarity, but it's power. It should be power. So you can scratch that out and say power. Kyate means power. So by the practice of the limbs of yoga, so he's referring to Ashtanga here. He hasn't mentioned Ashtanga yet, but he's saying the limbs of yoga. By the practice of the limbs of yoga, the reductions of the impurities of Rajoguna and Tamoguna take place. And also the light of knowledge leads up to the clear distinction or the power of discrimination between the seer and the seen. In other words, Ashtanga yoga is the means at this point. Now he's sort of foreshadowing at this point. He's saying that he's like, now I'm going to show you some procedures that will develop viveka. He mentions it earlier. Now he's like, okay, this is what you need to do to develop viveka, or discernment, in your mind. He's foreshadowing Ashtanga Yoga here. Okay, so there are three levels of yogis. Three levels of yogis. The first level of yogi is the Kriya Yogi, which is the beginning of the chapter. We talked about Kriya Yoga, which is the entry level yogi. His name was a Kriya Yogi, Kriya Yoga, and there are Kriya Yogi, or their purpose is to reduce pain and prepare oneself for deep meditation and the knowledge that comes with deep meditation. Kriya Yoga removes superficial impurities. The next level, which is the intermediate yogi, or the intermediate sadhaki, intermediate practitioner, is known as the Ashtanga Yogi. The Ashtanga Yogi is now learning and applying samadhi, and getting siddhis. What are siddhis? We haven't mentioned that yet, but siddhis are siddhi means accomplishments or perfections. So as you start to perfect yourself, you will start to get powers. Siddhis means powers. Extra, like powers that normal people don't have, like clairvoyance or super sharp memory, able to recall the past very clearly, able to see beyond one's birth and death, making the body light, making the body heavy, things like that. And we'll mention it more later. But yeah, so siddhis are perfections or accomplishments or powers. But all the powers actually have logical explanations. We'll get into that later. The reason why we think they're like beyond this world is because that they're mystical or mysterious. Regular people don't understand them. But if you understand them, it's just like, oh yeah, duh, it's logical, makes sense. So Ashtanga yogis are they're looking for a deeper cleansing. Remember, so Kriya Yoga is superficial cleansing. Ashtanga Yoga is deeper cleansing, deeper cleaning of the self, deeper purification. So second level. Third level of yogi, or sadhaki, is the samadhi yogi, the samadhi. This is the natural born yogi I mentioned in the first chapter. The natural born yogi, one who's able to attain samadhi, go into samadhi from birth. So very rare that happens, but some people are natural born yogis. Okay, so we will stop right there. I want to give you a quote. You might write this down. Actually, I'll write it down on the chat. This is a quote. This is what Ramaswamy's quote, and I love it. And the goal of yoga is to destroy dukkha to destroy suffering. To eliminate suffering. The goal of yoga is to eliminate suffering, eliminate dukkha. How do you spell eliminate? eliminate dukkha, suffering, and the goal of yoga is to eliminate dukkha or suffering by viveka kyati, or the power of constant discrimination and the means is Ashtanga Yoga, which lies on the foundation of yama and niyama. Ramaswamy. There. The goal of yoga is to eliminate dukkha or suffering by viveka kyati, the power of constant discrimination, and the means is Ashtanga Yoga, which lies on the foundation of yama and niyama. But we don't know what we know what it is. We've talked about it, but we haven't talked about it in the book yet. And so the next sutra, we're not going to get into it now, but the next sutra yet mentions it. Yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dhyan, samadayo, ashtabangani. So that's where we'll start next session. We're going to now break down the Ashtanga, what is Ashtanga Yoga, in the next talk. Yes, sir.
Where did you share that quote that you just, is that in the Zoom chat?
Yeah, it's on the Zoom chat.
Is it possible to copy and paste that into the WhatsApp?
Yeah, I'll copy and paste into the WhatsApp right now. Okay. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes, 8 minutes, you guys. That was a good one. I enjoyed that one very much. Thank you very much. Any comments or questions? My glasses. Unmute yourself. How are you doing, Danielle?
Good, kind of tired.
Your birthday's coming up.
It is.
Happy early birthday. I'll be out of town, but happy
Thank-
birthday.
Thank you. I'll be out of town too, so.
I'm getting old. See this? See the look. When I swallow, I get this one line on this side. I didn't have that before. The older you get, the more lines you get. Well, swallow, you'll see. Anyways, it's a muscle. I looked it up. I'm like, I've never. Can you engage? I can engage that muscle. Had to practice engaging that muscle. Anyways, I digress. Comments or questions?
So, would you
Peter.
say the source of dukkha, suffering, is avidya? Did we say that before?
Peter asked if the source of suffering is avidya.
The mistaking of the seer and the seen?
Because
that's a klesha, right?
that's a klesha. Yeah, that is.
First klesha?
That's the first klesha. Yes, avidya is.
All kleshas spring up from that one?
Yes. Yes.
And so, is that the kind of the main source of dukkha?
Yes. Pete, Alexa, turn on the living room lights. Can't see him. There you go. Yeah, the source of suffering is avidya. Yep, all the other kleshas come from that. And the avidya happens at the moment we take birth. The first ignorance is asmita. The moment where you wake up and go, I'm back, I'm alive, I'm here, I'm now. You know, when you have this feeling that now you exist separate from source. That moment when you wake up from your, in between death and birth, when you come back into being, the moment you separate from source, you come into being, that's the moment avidya happens. Well, in this life, but avidya follows us from life to life. That's why we're propelled to the next life, is because of avidya, because of desire. We desire to exist, and so then we get gifted this separation. It's a gift. This life is a gift, and life doesn't happen without separation from source. Just like you don't have this life until the umbilical cord is severed. Same thing happens spiritually. We have a spiritual umbilical cord that connects us with source.
So is it kind of a misnomer when we say that Purusha wanted to experience itself, and that's why we exist?
Who said that?
Do we say that? I thought I heard that before.
I didn't say that.
Okay.
I said that the reason why we are here is because we have desire. I didn't say desire to experience ourselves. You might have heard that somewhere else.
Desire to experience.
Purusha doesn't have desire. Purusha is desireless. It's only the mind that has desire. Mind has desire. Purusha has no desire. The king was not desire. He had no desire. The dancer thought he had desire. King had no desire. King is already happy. You might have heard that somewhere else. I'm sure other people have said that the Purusha has a desire to experience itself, but that's not what the yogis say. Okay. You're gonna have to, as you start to refine your understanding of this, you're gonna have to like filter out a lot of the stuff that's being taught these days, because a lot of it is either slightly or grossly incorrect or off. Can be slightly off. I mean, the saying that the Purusha has a desire to experience itself in this life is not far off. Some people say that the goal of this life is to realize the self, is to realize God within. We get separated from God because we have a desire to experience, and then this whole journey is like, how can I find source while living away from source? So it's you can get drawn into this abyss of thought. It's did I answer your question? Your question was, is avidya the source of suffering? Is it the source of suffering? Yeah, if you contemplate it long enough, yeah, you'll find that most pains come from this lack of self-understanding. Yeah.
And it's for that reason that the last few sutras were kind of targeting avidya.
It's for that reason that the last few sutras are targeting avidya. I don't know, maybe. But the last few sutras really hit on, huh?
25.
What about 25?
Talking about removal of ignorance.
Yes, yeah. As we approach enlightenment, the more we're going to talk about avidya. Because enlightenment is correct self-knowledge. So we have to really understand what is wrong knowledge, what is ignorance. So yeah, he's going to talk about it a lot. Okay, good question, and good paying attention. Definitely more attentive than I was when I first learned the sutras. I wasn't asking these level questions when I was learning the sutras. I was like, what the fuck is he talking about? Like, what is this language? What the fuck is this Sanskrit? Yeah, okay, guys. It is 29 after. We have 1 minute. Is there any one question left I can answer real quickly? Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya cha vaidyakena yopakarotam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi Abahu Purushakaram Shankachakra Siddharinam Sahasrashirasham Shvetam Pranamami Patanjalim Srimate Anantaya Nagarajaya Namo Namaha Namo Namaha Namo Namaha Om. Thank you. Have a good evening, you guys. See you soon. Bye-bye.